Welcome to A Table in a Tavern, your community RPG podcast. Every episode, we'll explore the depths of immersive storytelling, character creation, and mechanics that make ttrpgs so captivating. Whether you're a dungeon master, a player, or just a curious listener, there's a seat for you at our table. So grab your ale, pull up a chair, and let's embark on this journey together. Welcome to the Tavern. Hello everybody, this is GM Keegan, and across from me we have always DM Knock. This time joining us across the table we have longtime GM and publisher of the great adventure Gob's Petulance, and with us the GM Paladin.
Hello, yeah, thank you for having me. I'm very glad to be here.
Tonight's topic, can GMs prep too much? Or in other words, can they over prep? And sometimes we put that in one category or the other, but we're going to try to discuss both of them tonight. And that is in the session or in the campaign itself. Too much prep. I think that is a broad term. So let's kind of break it down and look at it from the point of view of what do you need to prep so you know what's too much prep. Because if you're good at something and successful, do you need to prep more or less? So I think that's kind of where we're at, is we first need to figure out what you need to prep, and then we'll discuss, is that too much? And since we have a great guest with us, we're going to turn it over to you. What do you need to prep, and what's your view on this too much prep topic?
Okay, I think that's a really good start because, yeah, it really starts with knowing what is it that has to be prepped, and then starting from there, right? So I think it's a little bit more nuanced of an answer than that, because if we're looking at it from the perspective of a dungeon master that just got into the hobby, they're probably not going to have a lot of awareness or history of wisdom of what they have to make, right?
Yeah.
And so the person that is very new to this is going to probably make a lot more than what they think they need, only because they have the inexperience of knowing what they do need. And so I think that whenever they're starting out at the beginning, there's going to be a lot of compensation for the lack of knowledge of knowing what they need. And so for that person specifically, they are going to prepare what they need in order to feel comfortable. But as time goes along, the game master is going to get a lot more experience on making the things that are needed for the game, like maps, like how do you make good NPCs, how do you make the game design. And so the preparation itself is going to become more efficient over time. So something that could have taken a couple hours might take minutes instead. And
I see. Okay.
Not only that, but there's a psychology involved in that, right?
yes,
You're talking about the new DMs that are just coming into this, and more often than not, I did it when I first started DMing, and that was I over prepped. I didn't know it. I thought I was doing great, right? And then you get to a point where you go, well, damn, I had all this cool stuff planned and none of it happened. And that's just growing pains. That's, as Paladin was talking about, that's the experience that will come along eventually. But it is discouraging, and that's the psychology behind it. You know, if you're designing all these cool adventures, encounters, a little dungeon crawl that, you know, your players just never get to, stuff like that.
absolutely.
But it never happens. Yeah, you kind of get the wind taken from your sails with that.
Yeah, I used to feel the same way myself. Like whenever I first started out, and I would make all of these things that never happened. But what I realized over time, and especially now, especially with the West Marches, all of that content that I made over the course of 10 years, I reuse it. And so it ends up not being wasted prep. It's just prep that I made ahead of time for something down the line instead. So I think that as long as there's reusability for it, and then it can be brought back. So I don't think it's ever really truly wasted unless it's a one and go and then you just leave it forever.
I like that point because sometimes we might kick ourselves in the beginning because you kind of just don't know your limits or what's, air quotes, acceptable, the right way to do something. But your ideas don't always have to go to waste. So don't beat yourself up right away if you're new at this. You can always rehash it, reuse it, and reskin it in different ways. Because like
Absolutely.
they mentioned, maybe the players have never touched it and you want to use it again with the same players. Well, you can because they didn't see it before, and that's okay.
Keep it behind the DM screen, because if they don't see it, they don't know that's coming. You got it up your sleeve for the next time.
It's very true. I mean, the number of times that I've made couple of dungeons before, and the number of times that I've just taken out the monsters and put in something new, it's a lot. And sometimes it's the same group. They sometimes don't remember they did that dungeon 2 to 3 years ago, and I just turn it 90 degrees, and it's a whole new
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, absolutely.
So, what are some like key things that now, since around this table we have experience? So we talked about those that are coming into it, but now at our tables, what are some of the things you concentrate on prepping, and then we kind of see or give examples basically to kind of show that we may be prepping all sorts of different things because we can probably fill in those gaps just through experience, talent, or other means. So what are some of the things that you personally concentrate now after so many years, since we've all been doing this clearly over like 10, 15 years? What are your focuses?
Oh my gosh, that's a very good question, and it's one that how do I start? So a lot of what I do nowadays is, of course, I write a lot for the Motherload, and so I have to prepare those adventures. And so aside from the publishing stuff, the games that I actually run, I mostly just run a West Marches nowadays. It actually makes it very easy for me because the players can engage each other, and I don't have to between sessions. They can talk to each other, and I can focus on my publishing stuff. But what I have to do for that campaign is all I have to do is work on a map, and what I'm going to do is send a
Okay.
picture of what that map looks like. And I spent about between Monday and Tuesday, because I had 2 sessions on Monday, one on Tuesday. I spent about a total of maybe like 16, 20 hours just working on the map, just designing the map, because I already have everything else in mind of like what I want to do. And so I don't really write down anything for the factions or the story, because a lot of that is very inherently just in me from things that I've done over the years.
Mm-hmm.
So all I do is map making.
Yeah.
It's kind of surprising to say, but that's it. Map
Yeah.
making and putting it in Foundry.
Great. What about you, Naka? What are some of the key things that you focus on each week?
Well, I kind of to piggyback a little bit off of what
Sure,
Paladin was saying. There's a time like I have my own campaign that I've been running for years, different groups of people, and sometimes we've reset that campaign because it's designed to be replayable. You know, especially the first few chapters, and kind of what Paladin said. You know, you don't need to prep anything anymore because it's ingrained in you. You know what you're talking about. You know what that next step is. So if we remove that prep and we consider what I do at my table now, I what I do is completely different than what you guys do to my knowledge, and that is I play at a table with people. You guys play online. So the prep inherently is going to be different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh yeah.
And then for me as well, so there are pass outs, right? Digital maps, all that sort of stuff that we do share on that Venn diagram. But I also make physical props for people. So that is another layer of DM prepping, you know, that I go into, and I try to bring the immersion in or bring in a puzzle physically to my players.
Mm-hmm. I think that was a really good point. There's two things I think could be missed easily. Is one, during Paladin was talking about, is he has a number of games per week. I run one. So that's a different how you prep multiple games. Do they share the same material? Can you carry over? Are they different? So you kind of have to, your logistics change at that moment. Unless you're all in the same universe, aka maybe same module, same West Monster, same something, you kind of can reuse it for multiple tables that way, which is a good thing because that's a lot of work.
Oh yeah, reuse and recycle whenever you can.
Yeah, exactly. I did that a while ago. A couple years ago, I was running multiple games a week, and I was like, "This is very different than what I'm used to." And I was like, "How can I reuse as much as possible? How can I cross-pollinate, so to speak, between it?"
Right.
One table would do something. I was like, "Oh, well, I'm going to use what they did and call that an adventure in another game now," because that's an idea that I don't have to think of.
And something that I think that is extremely valuable that I think maybe a lot of people don't think about is really using modules. And I know some people really like to have their homebrew worlds. However, I use like pre-made adventures to add maybe like 1 or 2 dungeons into things without having to use the whole thing. And so if people don't have enough time to prep, there's always something out there they can add. Just, so, kind of swing it on in. And still have a good time without having to cancel a session if prep is not possible to do in a week. Or
That's
people like me to prep ahead of time and they can't find the time or something comes up. There's always something they can add into their games.
yes, that is absolutely pro tip number one in this episode. Pull inspiration from whatever you can. It doesn't matter. Your players will love it, especially if it's something they're familiar with.
Yeah, you. I remember one person saying that it may be old to you, but it's new to them. And
Yes.
Exactly.
And the other one was prepping online versus offline. Sometimes we get in our own world and we think only in the terms of our experience, but the hobby has grown. It's exploded. VTTs are huge, huge now. We just may assume one way or the other just because of our personal experiences for so long. So having these are my group of friends that I hang out with outside of the game, and we also play RPGs together, is a very different environment than I'm recruiting strangers, or I have this type of game I want to play, or they can be longtime online friends also. But how you prep changes. Like, Knock, you mentioned bringing in a puzzle. Having something physical, I 100% love that stuff. Having a burnt piece of paper handwritten handed to me,
Yep.
or I hand it to a player, one of the most amazing enhancements to a game, because the physicality is
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, especially if it's something that is not what it appears, right? Because you
Mhm,
can,
mhm.
you guys can, anybody can look this up and just find like, um, it's called watermarking or water messaging. So you take a piece of paper, parchment, whatever, you can write on it. But if you take like a paintbrush, just put water on it and write a hidden message on there as well, let it fully dry. They don't know what they have in their hand until, oops, they pulled it up to the light and now suddenly they can see something. That kind of immersion where they discover it as a player is a beautiful feeling.
I've never heard of that, and I'm stealing it. So if you guys want to know how to prep, it's how to steal. This is what we're really talking about, how to steal from people, because that is I have never even heard of that technique, and I think that's amazing. I don't know if I'm talented enough, honestly, when it comes to crafts, but that's great. I think that's one reason I do enjoy some of the prep I do online, because I can use the talent of other people, these artists that create amazing maps, or like Paladin mentioned, taking things from a module. I could take a map from that and go, okay, I understand this is the purpose of the module on the map, but I think it gives an atmosphere for what I need. How can I repurpose it? And I think that's great and fantastic. I think it adds a lot. Speaking, we're really talking about the style of our table. What's our
Right.
version? Because if you look at a West Marches versus a very open world where the players are going, you follow them, and then you can have things that are like, I have this amazing story arc prepared, which are modules. You look at a lot of actual plays; those are all very heavy plot-driven games. Fantastic, but we prep differently for each of those, and it sounds like no matter what, maps are a big one. How detailed do you make your maps? Because I think that's kind of a thing. People have a preconceived notion of what's needed versus a want. So
Okay.
how much do you guys do?
Oh man, I love making. I used to hate making maps because I made it on Roll20 and I would have to put every single piece by hand. It would take weeks. But now that I have stuff like Dungeon Draft and Incarnate, I sent a picture in the VC, and I know people can't see this because it's a podcast. But to explain what they're looking at, this is what I made so far for my West Marches, and so they do share the same world, but it's all traversable. So the entire West Marches game, there's no fast travel. You have to walk from one place to the other, and you can walk through every single inch of it. And so my worlds end up being extremely detailed because I have nothing else to do with my time except prep the map. And so that's what I put my time into. But also in and of that stuff, I know that there was a mention about having what's it called? Really detailed like adventures and quests and factions. And they do still have that as well. And so there it's a bit of both. And so I prep a lot of the maps, and then the actual factions and the complications that are going on and the stories. But I am limited to having quests that are something that multiple groups can come together at. So as an example is there is currently a war going on between dragons and dinosaurs. So the party has to come into this whole mess and try to navigate who they're going to help. So it ends up being this really complicated mix where not just one group can solve the whole thing. And so that's a lot of what I do for my prep on a weekly basis. Is
He gave a great example of the amount of prep that he puts into it, right? Paladin has, you could hear that he is putting a ton of time and effort and energy. And that's why I want to kind of go back to the question is, we're really just kind of, how do you manage that energy, creative and the sweat, right? Where once you have an idea, you kind of have to put it on paper, so to speak. So do you ever think that people can prep too much, or is it just a, be more efficient in your prep? You could never prep too much. But you can cut the fat off.
I think that people are very highly inefficient with what they're doing with their time. And I learned that a lot when I started doing this professionally. Of course, this is what I do full time. And so it's easy for someone that, hey, I don't have to go out to the work because this is my job right now. So, but before, what I would do, I definitely can recognize some of the things I did before were inefficient because people, of course, they're not going to be able to do what I do. I can sit down and do this for 16 hours a day. But if that's not you, right? Like you have a 9 to 5, you're having to come home and manage your energy and everything else. I would focus on only doing one thing that day for as long as you can. And even if you're making maps for multiple weeks. And so because then in that way, when you're switching between tasks, you actually end up wasting a lot more time because then you have to switch your mental framework from, okay, I'm making maps to, oh, now I'm going to have to make stuff for quests and NPCs. Even just that switch, it takes about an hour for you to get into those deeper parts of your brain to kind of manage to have these advanced critical concepts. And so if you're going to be prepping all of this stuff, I would give yourself maybe like 1 or 2, maybe 3 weeks before starting the campaign to really get as much as material made for 1 or 2 months ahead of time. So then you're kind of at a comfortable spot. And so then you just make maps on day 1. On day 2, you make all of your factions. On day 3, you make all of your monsters and NPCs. Because when you do it in chunks like that, you'll find that you are much more efficient and you get a higher volume for the amount of time that you're putting in. So it ends up being a lot more content in a much narrower amount of time.
I have a way different perspective on that. And it's not that I disagree. I just disagree with how I run my table. And that's just that I don't go that crazy detailed on things, mostly because I run my table impromptu. A lot of it is. So I'll take the bare bones. I'll take the framework of it. And, as far as maps go, I'll go as detailed as I need to show them where they're going, kind of a thing. Right. But for the most part, my players take me for a frickin' ride every time. So I have learned a long time ago that I think I can prep for what they have, and then they surprise me every time. So I don't want to say I over prep. I purposely don't over prep.
Mm-hmm.
I do the carrot on the stick, right? I get my linear path. I find a couple branches, and I call it good there.
I think this kind of naturally divides prep into 2 things. This really comes down to 2. One is you can only prep for the things you do know, right? But then 2, there's also emergent prep. And so like what comes up that you haven't planned for, that's going to happen probably every session, right? So I think that really just kind of comes down to like the game master's toolbox, making sure that if you're not very good at impromptu, like coming up with something or putting up something out on the fly, maybe preparing something ahead of time. Like you might have a group of adventures just on the side, or maybe like a book of NPCs or situations just in case you need to pull something out. And so in that case, that would actually help out. I mean, just for anything over time. I mean, I have a notebook that, actually, now that I think about it, I don't think I've touched it in 2 years, but I have an entire notebook of like 300 pages of adventures, NPCs, monsters, whatever I need.
But it's a resource. Exactly.
Yep, exactly.
So pro tip number 2 in the episode is have these resources available to you. Have those random generators via books. Have a list of random NPC names because it'll happen. What's that guard's name? I don't know. Ben, I guess. yeah, guard 1. He don't care. Guard he doesn't want to give you his name. So having resources as prep, these are mandatory items, I would say. Like you gotta have these in your toolbox.
I think
you're just gonna have to fly off the seam of your pants with those.
And some people need them and some people don't. I mean, I don't need it as much nowadays. And so if you're comfortable with that, that's great. I mean, that's classic D&D right there.
I think that's the point I want to hit on is it takes time to know oneself because you don't know what you don't know, so which includes your skills. And perhaps you're great with names. I can always Ted Robinson. I don't know if that's a great guard name, but maybe you think you could come up with great names every time.
Sure,
right?
that's a basketball player.
I don't know where that came from in my head. But maybe that's the thing. I don't need to prep that because I think John Jones, which I think might be a fighter, I don't know, whatever, is you're in your head. You're like, I'm good with names, or I'm good with coming up with this or that. I don't need to do a full blown whatever. Knowing where your faults are or your weaknesses isn't a negative. It's a positive because you can, just like we said, be more efficient with your prep. I know some things you kind of just want to do because it's the nature of GMing, because you're the one that's kind of running and producing this. And if you need to produce encounters or combat, and if you use maps, these are kind of necessary parts. You can't on the fly. Technically you can. I know people might argue you can draw it out. Yes, I understand that. But generally speaking, there's some kind of necessities that the game demands, that the hobby that we play. But a point I want to kind of mention is you were dancing on both sides of it, and I realized, yes, I change my prep depending if I'm online, offline. I add so much more logistical prep now that I'm online. And when I mean logistical, I'm talking about I'm adding more music, more maps, more lighting, more tokens, more images.
Oh, yeah.
Way more.
Yep.
But when I'm offline, I got myself my notes. I'm gonna sit back. I just wanted to make sure I understand the rules a little more. And I realize I prep very, very differently when I'm live, so to speak, or offline, if you want to call it. And it didn't dawn on me that I thought I was the same either way. I was like, no, I've always been doing the same for these decades. But I realized my environment actually changed my prep. So whatever your personal environment is out there, and you have two great examples of Nock and Paladin of coming at it from different angles, trying to find out, what do I need for my game? And that's really what you have to do. Take what you need from what we say as, okay, I can use part of that, which is perfect because you took one thing, think about it, and that's the thing I need to prep, such as these adventures or having random encounters or a book of names. If that's what you need, that you have to identify your little positions, your weaknesses you need to fill, and then you can kind of, as Nock says, just roll with it.
Yeah, and when it comes to the online space, I know what you mean about like needing to get more maps, get more tokens, music, all that. But just as well, I really found a lot over time that the more I prepare to put digitally, like online, I find that often, I think that I can't say that that if you prepare too much, you actually take a lot more away from the game. And so I actually, whenever I stream on Twitch and I play online, I actually use less maps. I don't use more. I use a lot less because I find that interacting with the map sometimes takes up so much more time and more of the mental aspect away from the game. Yeah. But whenever I take that away, what do the people have left to engage with? Each other.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Hey, can I ask both of you I guess it's more of a facetious question, but it is prep related. Okay, so Keegan, I can totally see you before the game starts. You're in the bathroom, you're looking at the mirror, you're practicing the new voice of the new NPC that you want to introduce.
No. Uh-huh.
Is that DM prepping for you? Do you do voices?
Okay, no, I'm terrible at voices. I know my faults, and so voices as in I don't do accents, right? I have course change intonations and like your speed and everything to differentiate between all the different kinds of characters. But I'm terrible. I have no Scottish accent. I have no English. I'm terrible at accents. So I'm like, I know I'm deficient, and my embarrassment overrides I think my embarrassment would override the player's enjoyment, so I don't attempt it often, I should say. But I will say that kind of answer the question is the pre-stuff of understanding the characters and kind of practicing a new thing for it, I would say is also part of the prep. Whatever it is, Is it a speech? Is it a mannerism? Is it a character? Is it a thought? Is it a mood I want to kind of set? Like, oh, you know what they're going through is this. How do I reinforce that atmosphere and emotional feeling to build the immersion? I would say it's also prep, even though I'm not writing anything down. I'm mentally preparing to the point that I will listen to music before every game to get my mind right. I also play music for the players to, they've been working or going to school or just having a life outside of this all week long. And I want to bring them into a fantasy of some kind, whatever the setting. So I do play music for them too. But for me, I do it, and I actually need about a minute to kind of like take a breath, relax, think about my world.
That is so true. Yeah,
and
I never really thought about it.
Begin.
That is so true.
Keegan, I just see you sitting down at the table before everyone gets there. I mean, like, let me play Survivor, Eye of the Tiger. Here we go.
If it's that game session, then yeah, I will. I will if it's that session, man.
What about you, Paladin?
Well, surprisingly enough, so for God's Petulance, which is an adventure I recently published, so it's a psychological horror adventure that's about goblins, parasites, and lemons. I know the lemons part really throws it off a lot because it's this. And anyway, but about 2 minutes before the game starts, when we all get together, I just tell everyone like, hey, just like turn down the lights, get your local environment all set so that we can kind of be more immersed. And then I let us just sit around and we say nothing for 5 minutes. We just let it just sit in the silence.
Attention.
Interesting.
And then every time that someone says something, we'd start the timer over. So that way people would kind of like just really kind of slow down a bit. So we kind of get immersed into the setting of like, yeah, we're about to go into this factory that's got a bunch of really messed up things going on with the lemons. But anyway, the mental space, the mental headspace of getting into the game and what you're doing is a part of the preparation, not only just for the GM, but also for the players, and trying to like help them ease into that as well. And I could definitely see that being a huge benefit, just taking time at the start to try to get into the mood of what's going on. Like even something as like a recap or writing a few things down that the players might need or that the players might do. Like I think that all of that really does get into the preparation as well. And I think that you mentioned something as well earlier that I didn't quite consider, like building your skills, even if it's not something that you're going to use for that game, but something that you're going to use just overall, like whether it's getting your actor skills a bit built up, learning how to do the voices, learning how to do something new. Like, hey, I've never made a world map before. Let me learn that skill. Learning how to stream with OBS. There's so many things that really people can do that can relate to the game or TTRPGs. And then you get to the point where, hey, now you're on Twitch or maybe you're making adventures to publish, right? And then there's even more beyond that. Like, I think that there's a lot that goes into D&D or that can go into D&D. And really, it's just a matter of asking yourself, well, where do I want to go? Or where do I want to take this? Where do I want to go with this hobby? And you might end up realizing, hey, I'm perfectly fine just, where I'm at, running one game a week with me and my friends. Or maybe you want to go as far as maybe like one of us where we're preparing stuff for publication or streaming or doing a podcast, which I think is really, really cool. And so I think that really where the road can go is so many different routes. There's so many different things that people can do. And I think that honestly, it's just pretty cool to know that there's so many routes you can go with D&D.
Oh, yeah.
And you, Knock? Do you slap yourself in the face and like, get your game face on, it's go time? What do you do any of this? Or do you just say, I'm winging it, these are friends I know offline, so whatever, as long as they brought pizza, we're good?
So don't judge me.
That's a big prep. Okay, go on.
Don't judge me. I may or may not have bought a prosthetic wizard face mask, as well as a bunch of like cosplay costumes. So when they come down to my gaming space, I might be a different character every time they show up.
That's really cool.
So a little bit different. And yes, I do look in front of a mirror and practice voices.
Well, it sounds like you're just trying to get your game face on you're putting yourself in the immersive mindset.
I do, yes. Yeah.
Fantastic. So I think that's a perfect place to go to our last thought. And Paladin, what is your last thought on the topic of Can GMs prep too much?
And GMs prep too much. I think when it comes down to it, I think the only time a GM can prep too much is whenever they go well beyond their skills to the point that they end up burning out or hurting themselves. And that's it.
I think that is succinct and to the point. Perfect ending. Once again, I am GM Keegan, and next to me is DM Knock. Across the table, our special guest is GM Paladin. Thank you
for having me.
Have a good night. Thank you, community, for listening. Join RollNet's Discord now to continue the discussion with other GMs, DMs, and players about tonight's topic. Come back next time, where there's always a seat waiting for you at a table in a tavern.
I just want to play.